Uh, um, I was watching uh, a video from Richard Grannon, who uh, who's a really cool dude that I've watched for a long time. And the video he put out today is called "End the Torture of Narcissism's Echo Chamber." And I think there is a really um, interesting, like he's onto something, and he's just snipping at it. And I think something that I'm um, like it's so hard to grasp these things and put them into words, especially English, because I'm Swedish, and even though I've lived in English speaking countries, I haven't spoken, I haven't, like, I'm rusty in my English. Is that, yeah, I'm not sure why I'm saying it. Maybe because I'm trying to sort of excuse my poor English or something. Yeah. But the what he's talking about is how the narcissistic community is sort of infected and infested by narcissists who themselves believe they are the victim of narcissistic abuse, which they are, but maybe not from their partner, but their parents, or their, like, they've been raised into the narcissistic duality dynamic, because I think narcissism is, it takes two to narcissize, if you will. So it's, you have to, two people must engage in the narcissistic narrative, and um, like if so you have the, like in the original story of Narcissus, you have the echo part as well. And if you're a narcissist, you seek out people who can be your echoes. And echoes, people who have the like the echo part of the equation, seek out narcissists to make them whole. And it's sort of like in this video that Richard put out, and I read some comments, and it's like, well, if I only knew this, I would never date another narcissist. And as soon as they do this, you have to leave. But it's when they do this, you respond with this, and you complete each other, and it's the like the sun and the moon, or the light and the dark. It's the like, for a victim, the narcissist is their shadow. So like everything you've suppressed in yourself, the narcissist is, and everything the narcissist has suppressed in themselves, you are. So the narcissist has these like, well, it gets tricky because none of you have particularly hard word, but none of you, like the echo and the narcissist, or the addict and the codependent, none of them have like healthy boundaries. So they kind of merge and become one. And the attraction, I believe, is that they help you, or they force you into doing shadow work if you're willing and aware and um, curious. So if you say like, oh, I can't believe why I dated this person for so long. They were a narcissist, and now I like I just don't feel like dating them again. Or like, oh, I got out of there, and oh, you haven't learned about your shadow, which is, you haven't learned why you were attracted to that person and why they were attracted to you and why you danced the way you did. And you can do this shadow work on your own, but then you don't have the mirror to point out where your shadow is all the time. And it's, if you're really damaged and you've got a big shadow, it can be really painful, and really the dynamic can become really abusive. But it's dependent, the abuse is dependent on you and your partner. It's not the partner contains all the abuse and you're containing all the victimhood and innocence. It's when you come together, abuse appears. Abuse happen when the sparks begin to fly between the positive and the negative. And you're so full of negative, or you're so full of positive, and the other person is so full of negative and positive, or not negative and positive, negative or positive. And it's not like good or bad, it's like energetically you're you're either too much or too little, you're imbalanced, and this other person is imbalanced in the other way. You're trying to equal each other out, and in that process there's so much struggle, so it can and often does become really, really abusive until you start to see how you are causing the abuse to happen, even if you're the victim of it. And in the video, Richard said, like, I, I, I really loved a part of her talking about his past relationship with a woman. And like sometimes she showed up as this part of her which he fell in love with. And that's probably a positive part of him that he put in his shadow. And now he sees it in her, and he wants that in him. So he falls in love with it. And in the myth of Narcissus and Echo, Narcissus was this beautiful young man who had the beauty of a woman. And when he saw himself, he fell in love with himself, and he died because of it. But in the story, he sees himself in this pool of black, which is a mirror. And that same mirror could be seen as the pupil of another person's eye, gazing into their soul. You see the missing part of you, but it's actually in you. But you project it onto this black hole, and the, that which reflects is light. You project light, and light is reflected back. That's what a mirror does. So, like, he fell in love with a part of himself that he has suppressed into his subconscious. And she played that part. That part of her he loved. And all the abuse around that part was also things that he suppressed in himself, because when he was a child, he couldn't express those things in a healthy way for one or another reason. So he had to adapt and suppress. And the way those things come out is not through his physical behavior, because they they leave a black hole in his behavior, in his persona. So he's got this negative, like void, and this other person who's adapted opposite of him. She's got the sun that lights up his darkness in a really abusive way. And there's this like super attraction that forms because a void, like nature, hates a vacuum. So this void needs to fill it. And because it's such a like a strong negative void, when it sees these characteristics on steroids, it just can't help to sort of like want them, and it wants to consume them. And that the other person with the opposite adaptation has too much of this, and it's looking for another person to project it into. And if they find this person who's lacking what they have too much of, it's like the perfect image to project upon, because it doesn't really connect, because it's like I usually say that every person is their own universe. So like every person is whole, self-contained, and complete in themselves, but they have the capacity to diminish certain aspects and put them in a box, and the void in themselves that creates fills up with all these other characteristics that now have more space to grow. And then when one universe meets another universe and stares into that void, that's like if you stare into the pupil of another person, you can see their creation, their constructed, how they've constructed their universe. And if it's if it's a match, the match is that it's the opposite universe to yours. So this universe has 20% more of this, and that universe has 20% less of that. And when they come together, it's sort of this kind of alchemical process begins to happen, that they start to vibrate together. They start to, or there's an attempt to equal each other out. And there's resistance, which cause suffering, and we conflate suffering and pain. So we feel like we're in pain when this begins to happen, and we blame the other universe outside of our own world, and claim that they are abusing me, when in fact both are using each other to try and gain um, balance in themselves. And then we sort of socialize this process and call it abusive. Another thing he said in the video was like, if someone hits you, it's obvious abuse because it's physical and you can see it. But even there, I would question, like, is all physical altercation, interaction, is all physical abuse, or is that just another narrative? Is that just like this person was forcing, like this universe tried to force something into this universe, and that's abusive? And you can create that narrative and say, like, well, because it was trying to force itself upon another universe, it was abusive because um, we're so not sure if the word adapted. Like everyone wants to do things on their own terms in this day and culture and age. Um, and I think that's like, I know I am struggling with uh, the idea of authority and having someone else having authority over me. So I don't like when someone is trying to force me into doing something, even though they might think that that is what I need to balance myself out. So if someone said, we have to force you to take this medication because you are ill, what measurement are they using to diagnose me and say that I'm the one that's imbalanced and they are the ones that know how to balance me? Like, and that, I think he's in this video as well, he's talking about how, like, psychiatry and like the DSM-5 are modern day religions, or that's one religion, the same as the whole woke movement, and I, I'm gonna get a lot of shit for saying it, but I think the whole woke movement is the feminine being too liberated, like the feminine is too much. I wouldn't say in control, because if you look at the feminine and the masculine in like how they've been defined through my over at least 5,000 years, the masculine is control and the feminine is chaos, or like order and chaos. So if the feminine is too much in, like, is too liberated, it's not in control, it's out of control. And that's what I think are is partly why our culture is in such disarray, and why mental health is like we're borderlining on psychosis, is because the feminine has been too liberated without balancing the masculine to sort of contain the feminine a bit. And it's not like, oh, it's oppression, when it's that's part of sick ideology, that there's like there's always this tension between the masculine and the feminine, because the feminine wants to revel in chaos, because chaos is not bad. Chaos is the opposite of order, and order is not good or bad. Like there's like too much order is bad, too little order is bad, too much chaos is bad, too little chaos is bad. Balance is, you can never obtain balance in a dual reality, but you can strive for it, and you can be content with it being out of balance. And that's like the ideology of equality. Like to some extent it's always healthy to equal things out, but if you at the same time have a narrative that positions that which is out of balance to always have a dynamic of one being oppressive of the other, then you can never actually have equality. Because even say you have um, all these terms are infected now by this ideology, so you can't, like, I hesitate to say men and women, I hesitate to say black and white, um, let's say chaos and order, because they're sort of um, they're not being used in this ideological warfare that we're kind of engaged in mass culturally. So you have order and you have chaos, and let's say um, you want to equal them out so you have a balance of healthy order and chaos. So every time something happens, you can see, is it good for the order, or do we need some more chaos to break it up so we can shift things around? Because if everything is order, everything is rigid, everything is firm, and then it comes brittle, and then a little bit of chaos shatters that order. But if you have, like, I don't know how much, like, if you're gonna say, like, oh, we need 55% order and 45% chaos, and that's a good balance. And then something like some technology comes along which causes chaos to be like, oh, we have 70% chaos in our culture now, and like 30% order. We need to balance this out. What do we do? Because it's not just like they're absolute in themselves. You can have you can have pea-sized order and chaos, or you can have um, planet-sized chaos and order. Just like you can have like pea-sized masculine and feminine, or you can have like expanded massive amounts of masculine and feminine that creates tension. And that's like if you have a really masculine and a really feminine woman, and they're in balance with each other and they sort of complement each other, that's beautiful. But if you have two androgynous pea-sized human beings without any masculine or feminine traits, they're just like these gray flat people. Even if they're balanced, you won't be able, you're barely able to tell the difference. But say, like, if you have this balance, and if you apply this ideology on top that says, like, order is oppressive to chaos, then even if chaos becomes 70% and order is 30%, you still see through this lens of order is oppressive to chaos. So even if reality shifts, the narrative and the glasses you have on forces you to view this oppressive dynamic of order and chaos being victimized constantly. So even if reality shifts, you're in hyper normalized thinking about it. So you you still perceive reality to be narrative, like your narrative. So even if reality shifts, you project your narrative on it. And that's the dynamic of the narcissist and the echo, is that the narcissist always projects the narrative of whatever it is, and the echo always has to echo that narrative. And I think that's a big danger to these relationships, because no matter how much you equal yourselves out, these two universes, no matter how much balance you create in reality, the narcissist will always be in hyper normalized, adapted, ideological mode. So they will always project the narrative that is uh, cemented into their view of themselves and other. So if a narcissist is grandiose and they walk into a room, like what's behind their grandiose narrative is an inferiority complex that they always have to compensate for. So when they walk into a room, they have to view themselves as superior to everyone else, even if the people in the room are, well, like you can be superior. There's so many uh, factors. There's so many um, different dynamics you can measure if you want to, and see like, oh, I'm better at this than you. I'm not as evolved as you are in this aspect. I'm worse at cooking food than you. So what is it that pre what is it that this narcissist is superior to the people in the room? What is it specifically? And that can never be specified. You can't specify what the superiority is about, because then you fracture the hypernormalized false reality of the narcissist. And that's what Sam Backman calls mortification. So you shatter the ideology or the hyper normalized projection if you don't play into it. So every time they walk into a room, they're superior, and they're superior at everything. And when you specify it, it becomes uncomfortable because they have to keep up this appearance. And so it like in a normal relationship, you come in and you sort of see yourself as equal to another person. You come into a room and there's no superior, inferior at all. You're not looking for that. You just come in and there's human beings in the room, and you're like, you meet them on an equal level, and then someone might be better than you at certain things, and you might be better at certain things, and that's just like, that's reality. It's like in flux, and it's constantly like chaos and order are in constant like flux, and you're working with people to balance, and you're sort of like, sometimes it's like, well, I'm a chaotic person, so if you're a really orderly person, then we can balance each other out. And but sometimes people are like, well, you should be just as orderly as I am. Well, then we have too much order. Where's the chaos in that? And blah blah blah. But uh, I think that like the narcissist community or the narcissist reality or the narcissistic echo chamber that Richard is sort of talking about is like both perpetrator and victim are in this hyper normalized world, and I think it's if it the root, or at least one of the roots to this problem, if we want to call it a problem, well, the root to this maladaptation of both people is the inferior superior complex. So you might have had parents who always constantly put you on a pedestal, or you might have had parents who constantly put you down. So you've been put up or you've been put down. And you've caused this imbalance. And now you seek out people to help you balance, but you've adapted to this. So you can't, it's painful and you suffer when someone is trying to make you an equal, because you've grown, you've adapted, you've normalized your position as superior or inferior. So you're like, if you're inferior, you're this always giving, always beautiful, always uh, you're this martyr, and you always feel that you're taken advantage of by people that are above you who's abusing you. They're abusing your kindness because you're so kind. And these people who are superior, they're obviously super giving and kind, and they always give to these lowly, inferior people who they can't they can't raise themselves up. So these superior people always have to uh, show their kindness by raising them up, and that's abusive in this dynamic, because they're they're walking into the room with this narrative, with this adaptation. Like, every time I walk into a room, there's inferior people there that I need to lift up, and it's so annoying because they're so inferior to me, and I need to fucking tell them what to do. Or you walk into a room and it's like, oh, everyone is looking at me funny. I have to tend to their needs, to make myself available to them, to help them, because I'm not worthy to be in their presence. And there's there's an interesting documentary from what's his name? Well, it's called Hypernormalization, I think. It's the same guy who made The Century of the Self, which is also absolutely vital to watch. I need to watch that again. I think it was many years since I watched it. But it's ideology that's both parties, both the victims of narcissists and narcissists, they've both bought into this shared fantasy that Sam Backman calls it. And it's an echo chamber of victimhood and um, saviorhood. Like, I believe Sam thinks he's a savior, and I don't know about Richard. I think he's at least trying to be your compassionate neighbor, even though he struggles with getting distangled from this uh, hyper normalized ideology that he was raised in. So there's that. See ya.